Bitcoin down more than 22% in a month. Joining us right now is Anthony Pompliano. He's the founder and CEO of Professional Capital Management. Pomp, we need to understand sort of where you stand on all of this. Also, I should say there's been a bigger even fall in some of the other cryptocurrencies, but you've been a Bitcoin man. So where do you see the floor at this point, and where do you see the upside?
Yeah, well, let's put this all in context real quick. So over the last decade, Bitcoin has drawn down 30% or more 21 different times. Of that, 7 of them have been 50% or more. That's like having a global financial crisis every year and a half for a decade. So Bitcoiners are used to this. Now, who's not used to this are the people who are coming from Wall Street. They're not used to this type of volatility. You know, global financial crisis, there is literally people still fearful of that happening again. And so I think that what we're watching is as the rotation of the holder base happens, these new people are very, very fearful. We're going into end of year. There's things around bonuses. People are trying to figure out, should I actually sell this asset that I thought I was really excited about? And I think that's putting some downward pressure on the price. Now, in terms of that drawdown, given that there's been 21, 30+% drawdowns, I do think that a 35% drawdown that we've seen from the all-time high is pretty healthy reset. And I think that there's a question in the industry. Is this going to be one of these very large drawdowns that we've seen in terms of these bear markets of 70, 80%? Or is this simply something that is more normal? And we should expect this reset to then provide a new base, and then we go back to all-time highs over the next couple of weeks or months.
And where do you stand on that question that you just posed yourself?
You know, I heard something pretty interesting. Matt Siegel over at Van Eck said, well, Bitcoin's, in terms of Bitcoin's volatility, has been cut in half over the last year or two. And so if that's the case, if we're used to 80% drawdowns, maybe now the drawdowns are about 40%, right? You would expect that if the volatility has been cut in half. Well, we just saw a 36, 37% drawdown. And so I do think that as volatility compresses, people will be disappointed to the upside because it's not going to have these blow-off tops that they expected. But also there may be some, safety in terms of these 80% drawdowns are gone as well. And so I tend to think that we probably are somewhere around the bottoming. Again, if you see the fear and greed index at, I think it was 8 for Bitcoin, 6 in equities, that tells me that you can't stay there that long. And so I think that we might just go sideways for a while here and then start to kind of grind back up over the next couple of weeks.
Anthony, one of the big questions has always been how much leverage there is in the Bitcoin universe and whether there gets to be a point, and I don't know what the inflection point is, where there are enough margin calls that it effectively becomes this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy on the downside. Where do you stand on that? I mean, obviously, we talked to Michael Saylor just about a week and a half ago. He obviously represents a huge part of the market, too. Also, there's a number of ETFs now that represent a big part of the market. So how do you see that piece of it?
Yeah, well, there's a lot more leverage in the system on October 8th and 9th, right before the big liquidation. And so I think that, again, part of that healthy reset is that we went from higher degrees of open interest and leverage to today something that is much more normal. And I think that, again, that fear and greed index is a great signal as to how bullish people are. And, there's always the quote of you want to buy when there's blood in the streets. I don't think I've ever seen the equity fear and greed index at 6. The Bitcoin one going to 8 is very, very rare. And so I think that you're not going to see high degrees of leverage whenever you get that fear. And so that gives me, great confidence that we're probably not that far from having bottomed.
So are you buying right now? And what do you see as the upside in terms of how you look out even 12 months out? Because we've heard lots of predictions that would mean that the value would effectively have to double, triple, or more, actually, to reach some of the expectations we heard probably 12 months ago.
Yeah, I've been coming on the show for a long time, and every year I try to end up with more Bitcoin than I started the year with. This year I will have accomplished that, and also I will end Q4 with more Bitcoin than I started Q4 with. And so I think that if you've been doing this for a while, you understand that this is part of the volatility. The volatility is actually a strong signal. It's not a negative. I actually would be worried if Bitcoin's volatility essentially was 0. You need volatility for the asset to go up. Bitcoin is up 240x over the last decade. It's about a 70% compound annual growth rate. We are not going to continue to have that level of growth moving forward. But if we get something that is 20, 25, 30, 35% compound annual growth rate for the next decade, you're going to outperform equities. And I think that's why a lot of Bitcoiners are very excited about this asset as part of their portfolio.
Do you feel the same way about Ethereum or Solana? I should say, by the way, down even more than Bitcoin.
Yeah, you know what's been pretty interesting is I think that going into this bull market, people thought, okay, Bitcoin will be the lead in terms of movement on a sequence basis, but the alts historically have outperformed in these kind of euphoric blow-off tops. We haven't really seen that as much as I think people expected. And so instead what we've seen is that Bitcoin has remained kind of the dominant asset. A big part of that is that Wall Street embraced it first. Now, over the last couple of weeks and months, we have seen Wall Street start to take a look at ETH and Solana and some of these others. But I do think that there is still a kind of category creation, a category winner in Bitcoin as a store of value. That is probably the largest total addressable market. And so I think that Bitcoin will stand alone and it will continue to be the king of the crypto market. Doesn't mean the other things are going to go to zero. Doesn't mean that investors aren't going to go put that in their portfolio. I just think that Bitcoin is able to kind of obtain a very special place in a portfolio, and that's why you see so much capital flowing in, and that's why you see Bitcoin dominance continuing to be so high compared to the other cryptos.